Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. Okay, this game is fascinating. Pittsburgh 18, Baltimore 16. So Pittsburgh played a cleaner, more boring game, but the Ravens had 12 penalties. They lost 2 fumbles. They made more mistakes. And once again, God, the Ravens switch identity. So they were running 52% of the time this year, Baltimore. In this game, 33 passes, just 19 runs. And the entire game was a one-possession game. And it felt like, again, they did this in the playoffs last year. Baltimore gets pass happy in these big spots. And let me look it up here. Derrick Henry had 65 yards. It's like, guys, you can pass, but your identity is you're slightly run-centric. Not run-centric, you're run-leaning. Today, they did this in the playoff game. I'm like, well, you're within a possession. It's almost like they panicked a little. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought early in the game when Tucker had missed multiple field goals and they fumbled on their first drive and the Steelers were only up 7-6 with a little time remaining in the first half. I'm like, this is not going to be good because they're going to come alive. But for whatever reason, Lamar kind of looks like a different player against them. I mean, he is so much better, I think, this year. I mean, for that stretch, the last 5 or 6 weeks, than he was even last year. I mean, statistically, he's on a different planet. And then you're watching him today, you're like, I don't know. He's just frenetic. He's not. Now, obviously, their pass rush is good. TJ Watt throws him off even when he's breaking the tackles. But they were a flawed, dominant team because defensively, they really struggled to defend the pass, Baltimore. But when their offense is going to hit the skids, to lose to a team, and I get it, this is your Biddle rivalry, and the statistics of these two teams playing, it's determined over the course of, I think, like the last 10 games by like a plus-minus margin of a couple points. But the Steelers did not score a touchdown. And you guys weren't ever really have a chance, but like you said, the score, sometimes offensive coordinators get away from the run. Even when, if you're watching the game, you feel one team's in control, but there's a difference of being in control, like the Detroit Lions today when they're up 35-6. You're like, yeah. And there's a difference of like, you're only down 12-7 here. Let's take a deep breath.
John, I mean, Russell had a terrible pick in the end zone.
Worst throw of the day, I'd say, that I saw.
Terrible. He was only 23 of 36. Neither quarterback played well. Russell didn't play well. Najee Harris, 3.5 yards a run. So now George Pickens and Russell Wilson, this is where you really have to credit Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith. That thing is a real relationship now. It's a top 5 like combo thing in the league right now. Pickens and Russell Wilson, 8 catches, 11.5 yards a catch. Like, it's a thing. But Russell didn't play. If I'm the Steelers, I'm like, we didn't play very well. It was Russell's worst game. He had probably the worst interception he's had in years. We didn't score a touchdown. But you just said something. There is something about Lamar now is 4-12 against Kansas City and Pittsburgh with more turnovers than touchdowns. It's not that he's losing. It's okay if you lose. He is a different player against the Chiefs and against the Steelers. And my takeaway with him is the more you face Lamar, the easier it gets. This is why he's so dominant against the NFC. It's almost like,
I mean, it's not even fair. It's like Superman.
It's like, in a weird way, it's like facing a knuckleball pitcher, like in his prime, the late Tim Wakefield. If you never faced a great knuckleball pitcher, you don't know what the hell it is. Like, you just don't, there's like one in the league at any one time. And then if all of a sudden you faced a knuckleball pitcher 4 to 5 times a year, you get around on it. And I feel like with Lamar, I remember talking to Tom Telesco when he was the Chargers GM, and they played him. I was at the game. They played him at that soccer stadium and lost. Yeah. Then they played him the second time in the playoffs and won. And he just said he's so much faster in person than he is on film. Like, your players, you play him and then you're like, okay, we really can't get away with that. We wondered if we could. So it's like, listen, Pittsburgh has his number.
Well, I would say over the last couple of years, going back to last year, most teams that step on the field with Baltimore are inferior, and there's an intimidation factor. And
Yes.
there are definitely two teams. I mean, Pittsburgh. I mean, that game today had a couple moments where you thought you were going to get like a '90s throwback, like brawl on the field, which was it was refreshing. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like these teams, you know, in a day and age where everyone's buddies, they all go on each other's podcast. You're like, feels like the NFL I grew up on, where it's like these two teams hate each other. Pittsburgh is not intimidated by him at all. Like you said, they understand his speed. They also like do a pretty good job of corralling him. I mean, their team speed is fantastic. TJ
Excellent.
Watt's a dominant player. I just think for whatever reason, there is just not you're gonna roll us. And I think the Bills have that against Kansas City, where there's an intimidation factor the moment you start warming up and you see the other colored jerseys.
You know when I really noticed it? When Baltimore went for two. So Lamar Jackson going for two is like, feels about as, I mean, honestly, it's about as safe a bet in the league for two.
And they run that play a lot where he starts running, he gets in easily. I've seen it 10 times.
It's insane. And I'm thinking, but Pittsburgh has seen it so many times when the ball was snapped that you could have run a dive play. They didn't care. They had 9 of their 11 players on the edge. They're like,
going lateral.
We know what you're going to do. You're going to go, you're not going to go at us. You're going to go to the side. And I thought that 2-point conversion, I'm like, because I kept thinking, oh boy, they don't even buy the fake. They don't even care about the fullback on the field. They know it's Lamar on the edges.
One concerning thing for Pittsburgh, who obviously is right there with Buffalo. I mean, their record's fantastic. What are they, 8-2 after today? So you got 2 8-2 teams and a 9-1 team. And that loss to the Raiders now for Baltimore is a pretty big swing loss because now they got 4 losses. When they throw the ball outside the numbers and he throws it deep, he's good at it, right? Russell's comfortable throwing it to Pickens. I would say any roll out to the tight end,
yes,
they have a good connection. But when there has to be something a little more quick hitting, he held the ball a couple times and he got sacked. It's like it's kind of a feast or famine. And against the Ravens, it's harder to just. I think Najee Harris has really resurrected his career. I think he looks a lot better this season than he has most of his career. Jalen Warren's a good player, but you're not just going to gash them for 150 yards because I mean I think they're the best statistical run defense coming in the league, or definitely. Or I mean this week, one of them is Russell can be had if you can just neutralize their deep passing game because he will hold on to the ball. And a couple times he had some bad sacks where I thought, bro, you got to get rid of this, and it could have cost them, but they were lucky. The Ravens just had the Ravens looked off. It's weird because when you watch them when they're right on offense, it looks like one of the greatest offenses you've ever seen.
Yeah.
But in some of these games, it's just like they got a little like LSU Brian Kelly thing going on. You're like, things are just a little out of whack. It's like ton of good players. I'd want 90% of their roster, but you watch them today, you're like, and maybe it's Pittsburgh. But I've seen them play inferior teams with being off. It's weird.
It's interesting. I want to go back to the thing you said about Russell Wilson. That was the knock that I think Sean Payton really had on Russell, is that Sean would diagram plays that were over the middle and Russell would hold it and there would be a sack and Sean and the offensive line would be blamed. This was a knock
4 times a day.
Yep, and that was a knock Pete Carroll and John Snyder had, is that people kept banging on the Seahawks offensive line, and Pete privately, I was told this for a couple of years, like, hey, those balls are being schemed up. Those plays are open. That's been the knock on Russell Wilson, is that he's very successful deep ball, the lollipop, the rainbow. He's very good rolling, and he's not a guy that turns the ball over much. Some of that, it's a little Aaron Rodgers in his prime. He'd rather take a hit or a throwaway than throw a pick. So that's not the worst thing. But when you say that has been the knock on him, I know through Sean Payton, was he holds the ball. Those are diagrammed. And I think we have to be honest about this. Sometimes it's a height thing. It is. He just left tackle 6'7".
I feel like most of Purdy's interceptions, or a large percentage of them, are tip balls. And when you're shorter, I mean, sometimes Caleb, what did he do better today? Get on the move, get outside. When you're not 6'3", it's just basic math. How are you seeing over guys that are 6'5"? The thing with Russell, like I think we have to acknowledge now, Pittsburgh's 8-2. I would say high percentage they're going to win the division.
Yes.
And now it's going to be like, hey, can they take on Kansas City and Buffalo? And well, both those two teams have good pass rushes. So can they? And obviously Spagnuolo and McDermott are two of the top defensive guys. If they can neutralize some of those lollipop throws, can Russell pick them apart? Because especially Kansas City, it's going to be hard to run it on them. You're not just going to be able to probably run for 140 yards in a playoff game. you played a day like that, score. I mean, all they kicked was field goals. They didn't score a touchdown.
Right. Right.
So could you beat Buffalo? Because that's where now Pittsburgh's separated of like, you're 8-2. Can you beat those teams? I would still have reservations.
Yes.
Now, could your defense would just have to have one of those games where they pick Allen or pick Mahomes off
Yes.
2 or 3 times, maybe a strip sack. But I don't know if that offense that we witnessed today can beat those two teams without being a little more, like you said, I mean, explosive over the middle of the field, which is not his. He doesn't do it. It's not his
Yep.
style of offense.